Then my sister used it to host her wedding. She sent out 150 invitations with my address, signed my name on a contract I never saw, and when I finally spoke up, she said, "You're just a mailbox." What hurts most isn't the lie, it's how easily they assumed I'd stay quiet, again. But this time I didn't. And what happened next? Even they didn't see coming. They say the older you get, the quieter your reactions become. Maybe it's wisdom, or maybe it's exhaustion. Either way, I didn't scream that Friday morning when I opened the mailbox. I didn't drop the stack of envelopes in shock. I just stood there, staring at them, letting the weight of it all hit me slow. And then all at once, I'm Carla. I'm 42. I manage properties for a living and own the house I live in. Bought it with my own money. No cosigner, no handouts. It sits near the edge of Charleston, where the salt in the air clings to everything, and the neighbors still wave out of habit. That house has been my quiet, my one untouched space. Until that morning. I thought it was junk mail at first, or some neighborhood mailing campaign, but the paper was too thick, the calligraphy too precise. I picked up the first envelope, then the second. By the time I'd pulled out the whole stack, my fingers were trembling. Over 150 wedding invitations, all stamped and stacked neatly, each bearing my address. Not one was addressed to me, not even as a guest. I turned the top envelope over again. Return address, Carla Doyle. My name, my home. And yet, I hadn't said a word. No one had asked. No one had warned me. The bride, my sister Sierra, the sister who hadn't spoken to me in 3 weeks, the sister who, apparently, thought she could borrow a house the way people borrow sugar. I stood in my driveway, sunlight beating down, wondering what kind of person looks at their sibling and sees a building to host their fairy tale. I walked back inside slowly, the stack still in my arms. Sat down at the kitchen table. I didn't cry. I didn't pace. I just breathed. Through my nose, through my teeth, through the disbelief. Then I reached for my phone. "Hey, Carla!" Sierra answered like I'd called to talk about lunch plans. "I got the wedding invitations." A beat. "Oh, yeah. Yeah, we sent those out yesterday. Pretty, right?" "You used my address," I said. Not a question. "It was just easier," she replied. "Less confusion. I figured you wouldn't mind." "You figured I wouldn't mind." I repeated her words, slow and dry. "Well, it's just an address. Don't be so emotional." That stopped me cold. I could have said a dozen things. Should have. But I didn't. I hung up a few seconds later, politely, and then stared at the phone like it had slapped me. People throw that phrase around, "Don't be so emotional," as if it isn't designed to kill something inside you, as if it's not code for, "Your feelings are inconvenient to me." And Sierra had said it with ease, like she'd practiced it her whole life. I stood up and began walking around the house with the stack still in hand. Into the living room, through the hallway. I stopped at the guest bathroom. Wedding decorations had already started showing up in boxes I hadn't ordered. There were new towels I hadn't picked, tagged with little anchor logos and the couple's initials, Sierra and Jeremy. S.J. Cute. This wasn't new. Not really. Over the years, the house had slowly become the family house in everyone's mind. They'd borrowed it for holidays, girls' trips, barbecues. Once, I came home from a work trip and found 3 of Sierra's college friends sleeping in my guest room. "We thought it was fine," she'd said. "You weren't using it." They used that line a lot. You weren't using it, like I owed the space to anyone not actively occupying it, as if my work, my payments, my sacrifices weren't the only reason it existed in the first place. I placed the invitations on the kitchen table, all 150 of them, laid out like evidence. My hands were steady, but my chest burned. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't write a scathing email. I just sat. An hour passed. Maybe 2. At some point, I got up and opened the front door to get some air. And that's when Mrs. Halpern, my neighbor across the street, called out from her driveway. "Didn't know you were throwing a wedding. Looks like it's going to be a big one." She smiled like it was a joke, like I'd been keeping the event a surprise. I smiled back. Small, controlled. Walked back into my house. I sat down again, this time at the small side table near the door. Hanging just above it was a keychain, old, brass, slightly dented. It had been a gift from my father the year I closed on the house. Engraved on the bottom were words I hadn't thought about in years. He who waits in silence wins in peace. I took it down and held it in my hand. Let it rest there. I let the silence stretch. I needed it. The kind of silence that doesn't ask questions, just lets you breathe. After the shock of seeing those invitations in my mailbox, I wasn't ready to speak, especially not through a screen. This wasn't a text message kind of situation. This needed to be heard, voice to voice. No emojis, no hiding behind exclamation points. Just words, plain and bare. I made tea instead of coffee. Something about steeping a bag in hot water felt calmer than grinding beans. While I waited for the kettle to whistle, I walked in slow loops around the kitchen, rehearsing the conversation in my head. Sierra, I got the mail today. Hey, just wanted to check something with you. Did you mean to use my house like a shipping center? None of it sounded right. None of it sounded strong enough. But still, I picked up the phone. She answered on the third ring. Hey, little sis, what's up? Her voice was bright, sugary, manufactured. I got some of your wedding invitations, I said, keeping my tone even. All 150 of them. There was a pause, then a light laugh. Oh, that? Yeah, using your address made things easier logistically. Hope that's okay? I paused. Would have appreciated a heads up. You're not the one getting married, Carla, she said, tone shifting fast. Let's not make this a thing, okay? Then she said it. Don't get emotional. You always do. She said it like she was telling me to stop slamming doors. Like being emotional was the reason I couldn't be trusted with real conversations. I felt the words hit, like cold fingers around the base of my neck. I didn't raise my voice, didn't throw the phone. I said, okay, I have to go, and hung up. The silence in the house afterward was louder than her voice had been. I stared down at the tiles in the kitchen, then turned toward the drawer where I'd stuffed the extra invitations, pulled one out, flipped it over, my address, her name. Jeremy's name, not mine. It wasn't the first time she'd tried to write me out while still using everything I'd built. Years back, when I told her I didn't want to host her birthday party because I was working weekends and barely had time to rest, she told our parents I was just going through a thing. That was always the code. Carla's going through something. It explained away any moment I said no, any boundary I dared to set. They didn't want me upset. They wanted me invisible. And I'd been complicit. I'd nodded, smiled, disappeared when needed, showed up when expected. Now my name was on 150 envelopes I hadn't approved, and my silence was being mailed out to strangers like it belonged to them. I opened my laptop, almost on instinct, and clicked into Facebook. I wasn't looking for anything specific. Maybe just proof that I hadn't made it all up in my head. Then I saw the post. So grateful for my amazing sister Carla, who offered up her house for the wedding like the rock star she is. #family first. There was a photo, my porch, my railing, my flower beds, neatly trimmed from the weekend before, and there I was, nowhere. The comments were rolling in. She's always been so supportive. You're lucky to have a sister like that. Carla's a gem. No one knew the truth, and Sierra liked it that way. I didn't comment, didn't message her. I just watched as people I hadn't seen in years rewrote who I was with a string of well-meaning emojis. I wasn't angry, not in the loud chair-throwing way. I felt something deeper, something older, something that settled into my spine and told me I'd crossed a line I couldn't come back from. I was becoming a prop in someone else's story. That night, I stood in front of the hallway mirror, not to fix my hair, not to adjust my shirt, just to practice a smile. Her kind of smile. The one that says, everything's fine because I said it is. I tried. Held it for 5 seconds, then dropped it. Didn't fit. I deleted Facebook from my phone, walked back to the kitchen, picked up one of the invitations, tore it in half, stared at the pieces, then slowly smoothed them out again, laid them on the counter. If they were writing stories with my name, maybe I needed to start writing my own. That night, I sat cross-legged on my living room couch with my laptop warming my legs and a glass of flat ginger ale sweating on the table beside me. The house was still. Outside, The bugs were humming. Inside, my head was full. I typed her name slowly. Sierra Doyle Wedding, just to see what would come up. Pinterest was the first to load. Boards filled with peach florals, oyster shell name cards, and string light inspiration. One caught my eye, titled, Family Love, Carolina Sunsets. That word, family. The photos were mostly stock images, except for a few that weren't. There was my porch, my garden gate, my back deck. Captions read, Venue walkthrough went perfect today, and so blessed to use our family home. Not a single mention of my name. Not one. I didn't know what hit harder, the fact that my space had been rebranded as ours, or that I hadn't even made the list of people worth tagging. My hands hovered above the keyboard, unsure whether to scroll further or just slam the lid shut, but I kept going. My phone buzzed. The family group chat was still muted, so I opened it manually. Last message from me was, March, a thumbs up emoji under a birthday photo for one of the cousins. That's all. Since then, dozens of messages, all casual, none directed at me, so I sent one privately, to Amelia, my cousin on my dad's side, the only one who still spelled my name right. Hey, can you send me the venue info you mentioned earlier? I think I missed it in the group. She wrote back fast. Wait, you're not in the wedding chat? Then, hold up, sending screenshot. A new screenshot came through, a separate group, Doyle Wedding Logistics. I wasn't in it, but there they all were, Sierra, Mom, aunts, even distant relatives from Oregon. Messages scrolled, dress fittings, catering links, hotel blocks, pages and pages of coordination, and then I saw it, just once. My name. Carla won't mind. She never does. That was it. No ask, no mention, just an assumption, carved into the digital ether. I set the phone down without responding. My face felt hot, not from embarrassment, from the sting of knowing they were comfortable treating me as absent, even while living in my house. I got up and moved to my desktop, suddenly remembering a conversation I'd had with Veronica, the planner, last Christmas. She'd emailed me about a neighborhood holiday event and used my business email. I searched Veronica and scrolled. There it was, her signature still the same. Veronica Phelps Events. I clicked Compose. Subject, Quick confirmation. Body, Hi Veronica, hope you're well. Just checking, has a rental agreement been signed using my property? If so, can you confirm by whom? She replied 15 minutes later with a short note and one PDF attached. Hi Carla. Yes, we received the signed agreement 2 months ago. Signed by Carla Doyle, attached here for your reference. I clicked. The address was right. The layout familiar. My kitchen listed as the bridal prep area. My backyard labeled ceremony lawn. The last page stopped me cold. Signature block. Carla Doyle. Except I hadn't signed it. The font looked typed. My real signature curves to the left. This one sat stiff. Lifeless. Flat. They'd signed my name, like it was a formality, like I was a formality. I didn't slam the laptop shut. I didn't scream. I printed it, in silence, walked to the kitchen and laid it beside the stack of invitations still waiting in a crooked pile from earlier. They were going to use my name, my space, my silence. And I was supposed to be grateful? Voices echoed in my head. You're making this a thing. It's just family. Don't be that person. I'd heard it all before. I walked to the drawer where I kept old bills, tax statements, warranty cards. Pulled out a legal pad and began jotting dates, not phone numbers, dates, availability windows, searched short-term property management companies near me. Clicked the top 3. By the time I looked up, the ink on the page had smudged under my hand. A pen clicked once, twice. Then I set it down. I circled the wedding weekend. Then I underlined it. If they wanted to plan things behind my back, let's see how they handled surprises. The house was quiet, but it didn't feel like mine anymore. Not fully. I opened the cabinet above the fridge, reached past old envelopes and a nearly empty roll of packing tape, pulled out a manila folder labeled Property Documents. I slid the contract inside, right at the back. The next page? A blank form, Revocation of property use consent. I read the header once, then again, and smiled, not with spite, but with clarity. By Saturday morning, the house no longer felt like mine. Boxes had arrived the night before, stamped with the names of vendors I didn't hire, addressed to people who didn't pay the mortgage. Still, I said nothing. Mom called earlier and asked me to be home that day for the venue walkthrough. Not help, not lead, just be there. I knew what that meant, so I stayed. I put on jeans, tied my hair back, and let them walk through my kitchen like it was part of a brochure. Sierra laughed with the caterer, snapped selfies with cousins she hadn't spoken to in months. My name came up once. "Ask Carla where the extra chairs are," someone said. I pointed toward the shed. No one looked me in the eye. Being present was all they needed to justify everything. In their eyes, if I wasn't screaming, I was consenting. That was the contract they understood best. They served lunch on the patio, sandwich trays from a place I'd never liked but always paid for. I took a seat at the far edge of the table, away from the cluster of voices talking over centerpieces and seating charts. Sierra stood up, tapped her glass. "Hey, before we all get too full," she said, her tone perfectly rehearsed. "I just want to say thank you." She turned toward me. "To my unshakable rock, Carla. She never asks for credit but gives everything. She even lent us her home without blinking." Applause followed, real clapping, real grins. I smiled. I nodded. Outside. Inside, I was unraveling. That sentence stuck, without blinking, not because it wasn't true, but because it skipped the part where they never let me open my eyes in the first place. I didn't blink because I wasn't allowed to see it coming. The room blurred for a second, but I held myself still. If they were going to clap for a lie, I wasn't going to reward them with a reaction. Veronica, the planner, called me over afterward. Said she wanted to show me some of the setup updates. We walked past the deck, through the garden arch that had been borrowed from her last event. Then she stopped at a small wooden stand placed near the back fence. On it sat a vintage white mailbox, rustic, decorative, painted with soft lettering that read, "Mailbox Memories, a tribute to Carla." Below it, "Write a note to the sister who gave us this day." I didn't move. Guests were expected to drop letters into the box. Notes, gratitudes, words for me, to be read aloud at the rehearsal dinner. It hit like a punch wrapped in lace. They'd made me a prop, a decoration, a theme. I turned away mid-sentence. Veronica called after me, but I didn't answer. I walked back inside, past the laughter, past the kitchen, straight into my room, and closed the door behind me. Hours later, I came back down. Mom and Aunt Rachel were waiting in the dining room. Their expressions matched, concern with a glaze of politeness. "Carla," Aunt Rachel said, folding her hands, "we heard you walked away from the tribute." "Sierra worked really hard on that," Mom added. "It was supposed to be meaningful." I didn't sit. "You know," Aunt Rachel continued, "if you push this, you'll embarrass the whole family. Let's not make a mess in front of people." Mom leaned in. "You're not that type. You've always been the calm one." I stood still. Let them speak. Then I answered, slow, quiet. "I'm not making a scene," I said. "I'm just refusing to be used as the backdrop." Neither of them replied. That silence? It said everything. More than any shout ever could. By nightfall, the house was glowing. String lights strung across trees, tables folded and stacked near the shed. I sat on the porch swing alone, nursing a cup of tea that had gone cold hours ago. I could hear Sierra inside, laughing, holding court. She always knew how to make a room bend. But outside, that was still mine. That quiet belonged to me. Then I opened my laptop and typed slowly. Notice of revocation, venue use. I attached the contract I'd printed the night before, stared at the cursor hovering over the send button, then I closed the laptop. Not yet. By the time Sunday rolled around, the house didn't smell like home anymore. It smelled like rented linens, warm chafing dishes, and wilting roses. It didn't sound like my house either. No creaks from my old floorboards, No quiet hum from the dishwasher, just silence. But not the kind that calms you. It was the kind that makes everything echo louder than it should. I stepped barefoot into the hallway and spotted a trail of crushed petals leading from the kitchen to the living room. Flyers for the wedding itinerary were still scattered on the console table, next to a pair of sunglasses I didn't recognize. The place felt like an event space someone forgot to reset. When I got to the bathroom, I stood still. My toothbrush was gone. In its place sat a bride emergency kit, mini hairspray, safety pins, mouthwash, gum, pain relievers, and a handwritten note from Sierra to herself. "You've got this." No one had asked. No one had told me they were replacing my things. They just moved them. My life shifted aside like furniture to make room for someone else's celebration. I didn't move for a long while, just stood there, staring at the counter. Not angry, not surprised, just done. Later that afternoon, the doorbell rang. It was Mom. She stood on the porch holding a pie, like we were still pretending this was a family moment and not a hostile takeover with better lighting. "Hi, sweetheart," she said with that practiced calm. "Can we talk?" I let her in, mostly because arguing on the porch would have looked worse to the neighbors. She sat at the dining table. I stayed standing. "I wanted to check in," she started, slicing into the pie as if we were about to have tea. "I know things got a little off yesterday. You walking away from the tribute. That surprised people." I didn't answer. She took that as permission to continue. "Sierra was really hurt. She worked hard to make you feel included." I raised an eyebrow but kept quiet. "She thought the booth was a sweet idea, a way to honor what you've done without making it a big thing. I just think, maybe you misread the gesture." Her voice was syrupy, her message sharp. "Let it go. Don't ruin this. Let's not make this bigger than it needs to be," she added, smiling. I took a breath. "You all made it big," I said, "when you made me invisible in my own house." She blinked but didn't pause long. "It's family, Carla. We don't need paperwork for love." That line, I'd heard it before, always when someone was about to take something that wasn't theirs. "But apparently," I said slowly, "we do need paperwork to take what doesn't belong to you." She didn't respond, just shifted in her seat and looked at the pie she no longer wanted. When she left, I checked my email. A new message had come in, a forwarded family newsletter from my cousin Janet. I opened it out of habit. The subject line read, "From Sierra, a special thank you." I already knew what was coming, but I read it anyway. Sierra wrote about our family's summer home, a place where we all made memories, shared summers, and grew up learning the meaning of togetherness. She thanked our parents for creating this space from sacrifice and love. My name was not mentioned, not once. The house, my house, was now part of a fairy tale that cast me as a background character, if I existed at all. "They weren't using me," I whispered to no one. "They were editing me." And I let them. I sat on the couch, my couch, and for the first time in days, I allowed myself to cry, not out of sadness, but out of recognition. They had built an entire narrative, a paper house, and placed me outside the front door. That night, I remembered something I hadn't thought of in years. It was Sierra's birthday, 5 years ago. She'd hosted a dinner at my house. Invited her friends, her coworkers, her fiancé at the time, not Jeremy, a different one. I came home to find balloons, champagne flutes, and a room full of strangers in my kitchen. "This is my baby sis," Sierra said, raising her glass when I walked in. "She lets me crash here anytime I need a reset. She's the best." Everyone laughed. I smiled, but I remembered the months leading up to that dinner. 3 jobs, one in the mornings, one late at night, freelance on weekends, all to scrape together the down payment. The nights I skipped dinner, the weeks I fixed plumbing on my own to save the service fee. None of that made the toast. I let myself collapse onto the couch, head tilted back, eyes open to the ceiling I'd repainted last spring. My body wasn't tired. It was my belief in them that had given out. My strength wasn't gone, just under renovation. "I'm not asking them to see me," I said aloud. "I'm demanding they stop using me." And I meant it. Later, I sat at the desk in the corner of the living room, pulled out the manila folder, opened the legal form titled Revocation of Property Use Consent. I filled in the blanks, typed out the reason clearly, legally. I didn't send it. Instead, I printed a hard copy, folded it neatly, and placed it under the brass mailbox key that still hung by the door. Then I picked up my phone and typed out a message to Veronica. Hi. I need to clarify something important about the venue access. No smile, no punctuation flare, just truth. I woke before the alarm, the kind of waking that doesn't come from rest, but from a brain that won't sit still. It wasn't confusion anymore. That fog had lifted sometime between the fake gratitude speeches and the mailbox tribute nonsense. What was left was resolve. Cold, straight-backed, still. I brewed coffee, black, bitter, no sugar this time. My laptop was already open on the dining table, the folder of documents beside it from the night before. The wedding contract, the photos I'd taken, and the unsigned revocation form sat in quiet formation, like soldiers awaiting orders. I clicked into the email thread with Veronica, the planner, and attached what needed attaching. The deed to the house, my notarized signature, a clear statement in the body of the message. This is not a shared space. It never was. My finger hovered a second before hitting send. The moment felt small, but my chest felt different after. I took a sip of the coffee. It was strong enough to bite back. Half an hour later, my phone buzzed. Unknown number. I almost ignored it. Then I saw the area code. I picked up, already bracing. Carla? The voice asked. Unsure. I froze. Aaron. 6 years. And he hadn't called once. Not when I moved, not when I got promoted, not when our mutual friend passed. But now, here he was, dialing out of the blue. I said his name like it was foreign. Yeah, wow, he chuckled. Wasn't sure you'd answer. I almost didn't. Polite silence. So listen, he said, the awkward chuckle still lingering in his tone. Sierra invited me to the wedding. Said you were excited to see me. I didn't respond. She said you were over it. That you'd changed. That you might even be happy to reconnect. I stared at the floor like it had something to say. We broke up because you lied, I finally said. Aaron paused. I know, and I'm not trying to… Look, I was surprised too. But I didn't want it to be weird if I showed up. You shouldn't have been invited. He let out a short breath. Right. Yeah. Sorry. I hung up. My fingers stayed curled around the phone long after the screen went dark. I hadn't said his name to Sierra since the week I found out he was seeing someone else behind my back. She'd said I was being dramatic then too, said I needed to let go. But now she was weaponizing my past like it was just another decoration. Later that afternoon, I was at the office, catching up on reports I hadn't looked at in 2 days, when Mom walked in. No warning, just the door opening and her voice calling my name like it still had pull. She carried a lavender-scented gift bag and that tired smile she used every time she needed something to feel softer than it was. I thought you could use a break, she said, placing it on my desk. I didn't look inside. Have you spoken to Sierra today? She asked, smoothing her cardigan as she sat. No, she cleared her throat. She mentioned you were upset about Aaron being invited. She didn't mean anything by it, you know. She thought it might be healing. Closure. She doesn't know what closure is, I said quietly. Mom ignored that. Carla, please, don't let this spiral. Sierra's worked so hard. Let's not fight feelings with forms. That line, it almost got a laugh out of me. I looked her straight in the eye. I'm not fighting. I'm protecting. Her lips tightened. You always make things harder than they need to be. I let that sit. No rebuttal. No defense. She stood up. Well, I just hope you won't regret making this weekend about conflict. I opened the gift bag when she left. Lavender candles. Of course. That evening, I called Veronica, confirmed she received the revocation. We got it, she said. We're halting all setup until this is resolved, but I expect pushback. I'm ready, I replied. I wasn't bluffing. I walked through the house again. took pictures of every corner that had been changed without my permission, rearranged furniture, leftover decorations, a box of bride slippers sitting where my winter boots used to be. Each photo wasn't just proof, it was insurance. When I finished, I changed the locks, not because I was scared of them showing up, but because I was finally done pretending they respected the difference between mine and ours. Just before bed, the messages started. First from a cousin. "We're hearing you canceled the wedding venue. This must be a mistake." Then another, and another. Finally, "Sierra, you're being cruel. I trusted you." I didn't reply. I walked outside to the porch, phone still in my hand, and stared at the mailbox. It hadn't changed, still chipped at the corners, still held together with a strip of tape from last winter, but it had become something else now, a symbol of everything they thought they were entitled to, just because I'd stayed quiet long enough. I whispered aloud, "Trust only matters when it's mutual." I was up before the sun, before the birds, before the noise could catch up to me. The kind of morning where the silence has weight, where the light spills in soft and slow. My coffee steamed on the railing while I stood on the back porch and looked out over a yard that had been trampled by borrowed joy. The house was still for the first time in days. No chairs being dragged across tile, no whispers in hallways I paid for. I walked back inside, barefoot, through my living room and into the office. Sat at the desk. Pulled up the final email to Veronica and attached the revocation form, notarized and firm. No fluff, no long explanations. They planned without me. I'm planning without them. Before I closed the laptop, I glanced out the window facing the side gate. Then I stood up, walked outside, and discreetly installed the new security camera I'd bought at the hardware store yesterday. Just in case. Mid-morning, Dad called. Said he wanted to meet for a quick coffee. I chose the small cafe near the train tracks where the baristas didn't ask questions and the tables weren't close enough to eavesdrop. He was already sitting when I arrived, button down, tucked in, hands folded like he was preparing for a performance. When I sat, he smiled in that polite fatherly way that's meant to calm storms without ever admitting they exist. "I'm glad you came," he said. "I figured maybe we could talk, just us." I nodded, but didn't say anything. I wanted him to go first. He took a slow sip. "Look, I know this has been messy, and Sierra's hurt, but she didn't mean any of this to harm you." He looked at me like I should nod again. I didn't. She just wanted to have her day, a good day, for once. Then he leaned forward, voice lower. "You're putting the family's reputation on the line. You know what people will say." I looked him straight in the eye. "When exactly did my peace stop being part of that reputation?" He blinked, exhaled slowly. Didn't argue. "Sometimes," he said, "the oldest daughter isn't the strongest one." I stood up, left the coffee untouched, didn't say goodbye. That sentence was enough. By the time I got home, a call came in from Veronica. "We're halting everything," she said. "We received your revocation and notified all vendors." I asked, "Has Sierra responded?" "She's threatening to get lawyers involved," she said. "But you're in the clear. The law's on your side." Good. I walked to the window, watched a rental truck roll away. The back wasn't even closed. I could see the flower boxes sliding as it turned the corner. My phone buzzed every 10 minutes after that. Cousins, aunts, some texts long and guilt-ridden, others short and bitter. "You've made your point. Way to blow things up. We're family, remember?" I read them all, replied to none. That evening, I found myself untangling lights they'd left draped across the front porch, strand by strand, coil by coil. Sierra once told me, after Dad's minor stroke years ago, "You're not the kind of woman people rally around. You're the woman they expect to endure." I had swallowed that then, believed it, even, thought being unshakable was something noble. Turns out, it was just code for, she won't push back. Not anymore. That night, as the sky turned purple, I walked into the backyard and started pulling the stake signs out of the grass, the ones that read, "Reserved for groom's family," and "Bride's cousins, left side." No tears, no hesitation. They built this chaos on my silence. Let's see how it survives my clarity. At 8:43 p.m., the doorbell rang. No knock, just a letter slipped through the slot. No stamp, hand-delivered. I opened it at the kitchen table, typed letterhead, a formal tone I recognized immediately. From Sierra's lawyer. Notice of potential legal action, malicious obstruction of familial agreements, civil claims pending damages. I read it twice. Then, quietly, I opened the drawer beside me and pulled out the digital recorder I'd set there 2 nights ago. I clicked play. Sierra's voice came through, calm and smug. Don't worry, Carla won't fight. She never does. I spent the morning cleaning my house, not for family, not for friends, but for strangers, strangers I had invited on purpose. Every room was wiped down, fresh linens folded on the guest bed, a welcome basket set up on the kitchen counter with bottled water, fruit, a map of the city, and a note that read, "Enjoy your stay." It was the kind of effort I used to reserve for my family, the kind of gesture that once made me proud. Now, it was armor. I took photos of everything, the living room, the bathrooms, the yard, not for memory's sake, for documentation. I wanted proof of how this space looked before they tried to twist it again, before Sierra found a way to turn my home into her narrative all over again. At noon, I opened the rental agreement one last time, line by line, the cancellation clause, the access terms, the locked keypad system. Everything was airtight. Legally, the house was no longer available to anyone outside the contract. At 12:42 p.m., I emailed the management company with final confirmation. Keypad code active by 7 o'clock a.m. tomorrow. There was no shaking in my hands, no rush in my chest, only a steady hum. The kind of focus that doesn't announce itself. The kind you earn. Later that day, the group text came back to life. Cousin Bethany, are we still meeting at the house first thing tomorrow? Aunt Kim, I heard the venue changed. Is that real? Mom, let's stay calm. I'm sure it's just a misunderstanding. I said nothing. Then, a direct message popped up from Elijah. They're taking me off the guest list. Said I'm creating division. I paused, then typed, "That's what happens when you defend the wrong sibling." He replied almost instantly, "You're not the wrong sibling. You're just the quiet one they thought wouldn't speak." That one hit deep. I let myself smile. Around 6:45 that evening, I moved my car down the street and parked beneath the trees, pulled the visor low, sat still and waited. The next morning, at 7:02 a.m. sharp, a silver SUV pulled into the driveway. Out stepped a woman in her mid-50s, her husband, and their teenage son. They stretched their arms, smiled politely, luggage in hand. Moments later, a rep from the rental agency arrived, clipboard ready, key code on hand, perfectly on time. I watched from across the street as she greeted them, showed them around the porch, pointed to the keypad. Then Sierra showed up, still in slippers, hair half curled, makeup smeared. Her car pulled up fast, brakes biting. She got out and started speaking to the agent with wild hand gestures. Her voice was loud, though I couldn't make out the words. There was confusion, back and forth. She pointed at the house, then at her phone. The agent shook her head and pointed to the paperwork. From inside the SUV, the guests waited patiently. And me, I sat in my car and watched. I didn't feel glee. I didn't feel vindicated. I felt quiet. This wasn't revenge. This was reclamation. They built their wedding on my silence. Today, I chose not to stay silent. Back inside, I made myself a second cup of coffee. Real cream, real sugar. Sat at the kitchen table where I'd once folded napkins for Sierra's baby shower. I remembered something Mom said years ago, after a different family fight, back when I was still trying to keep things smooth. Let it go, Carla. Be the bigger person. I used to think being bigger meant being quieter. Today, I realized I wasn't trying to be bigger. I was just trying to stop being invisible. The texts came in again. You've gone too far. This could have been handled better. I can't believe you'd do this to your own sister. I didn't reply, not because I didn't have the words, but because they weren't worth the breath. At 5:10 p.m., the knock came. Not a polite tap, not a hello kind of knock. It was fast, angry, repetitive. I opened the door slowly. Sierra stood there, red-eyed, makeup smudged, still wearing the same slippers. "You humiliated me," she spat, "in front of everyone." I didn't flinch. Instead, I glanced at the mailbox behind her. "Funny," I said. "That's where it started." Before she could answer, I closed the door. Gently. By Friday evening, the noise had faded. What lingered wasn't anger. It was residue. The kind that clings to curtains, to door frames, to the corners of a home once overrun by people who never asked permission. I moved room to room with a garbage bag in one hand and quiet in the other. Folded programs, a half-torn table assignment chart, a gift box labeled Family Wedding HQ that hadn't even been opened. All of it went out. In the hallway, I noticed a framed photo leaning against the baseboard, a snapshot from one of the early planning days, probably taken by Sierra or one of the cousins. It showed my backyard, my house, my porch railing. Everyone was there, except me, cropped clean. I pulled it from the frame and dropped it straight into the trash. Then I walked to my bookshelf and picked up a photo I hadn't looked at in a while. Me, sitting alone on the porch, legs crossed, cup of tea in hand. The sky was soft behind me, my smile half-curved but content. That one went into the frame. This house doesn't need to hold their version of the past anymore. It never did. The next morning, I got a text from Dad. "We're nearby. Can we bring breakfast?" I stared at the screen a moment longer than I should have, then typed, "Sure." I set the table for 3. Eggshell plates, orange juice in small glasses, napkins folded, not ironed. They arrived 10 minutes later with a grocery bag and awkward smiles. Mom kissed my cheek too quickly. Dad patted my shoulder like I was a client, not his daughter. We talked about the weather, about a road closure near the river, about how Trader Joe's now sells banana ketchup. Surface-level conversation, polished and weightless. Eventually, Mom set her fork down. "We didn't expect things to end like this." I looked at her. I did. She blinked. Dad stared at his plate. No one reached for the orange juice. A few more bites passed. Then she said what I knew was coming. "She's struggling. Sierra." She didn't think it would get this far. I tilted my head slightly, voice even. It got this far because no one ever told her to stop. Dad exhaled. "We all made mistakes." "I don't disagree," I said, "but mistakes are actions. Patterns are choices." Mom looked down at her napkin, folded it, unfolded it, folded it again. "I'm not asking for apologies," I said. "I'm asking for boundaries." That was the first time I'd ever said it like that. Not a suggestion, not a plea, just truth. The room didn't get louder, it got clearer. We finished eating without much else being said. The dishes weren't dirty enough to matter. I let them sit in the sink. Outside, the breeze had picked up. After I walked them to the door, Mom turned back. "We're thinking of doing something smaller next month. A backyard celebration. Nothing big, just family. Sierra's calling it a reset ceremony." Then she asked the question like she was asking about dinner plans. "Will you come?" I paused at the threshold. "I'll let you know if I'm available." Her face didn't fall, but she understood. After they left, I went inside and updated the security codes on the gate. Then, I opened the drawer beside the entry table, pulled out the folder labeled Closed Matters, and placed the signed revocation form inside. That night, I didn't light candles. I didn't pour wine. I didn't replay old conversations in my head. I just sat on the porch, tea in hand, soft wind moving the trees around me. The keychain hanging on the hook beside the door clinked gently with the breeze. "He who waits in silence wins in peace." For the first time, those words didn't sting. They didn't make me feel like a doormat. They felt earned. A message pinged on my phone. It was Elijah. "Brunch next Sunday? No family. Just people who see you." I smiled, not wide, but deep, and typed back, "I'll be there."